Hi everyone, this is Richard. In this video, we're going to briefly go over adding and removing elements. When we look at this web application, it looks kind of strange, doesn't it? We are choosing the last menstrual period, and I don't want a future date for the estimated gestational age, but at the same time, why is this even here? It works without it, obviously, but that kind of looks a little strange. It's confusing, isn't it? So if I think of how I want it to look, I don't want it there by default. And when I click it, it appears after that. Okay, so we go to the index. I'm going to remove this right here. Save it. That's better. When I click it, then it's going to appear. Why don't we try that? Okay, how am I going to do that? Well, we need the checkbox. We need to create an event listener, right? So let's create an object here. Check box input element, check box date equals query selector check box date. Right now we need to add an event listener for this. So check box date dot on click dot listen. I don't think I'm going to need anything else, and I'm going to refer to the method called future date. Actually, I think I'm going to put something inside of here. I'm going to put the check box date inside of there. And we'll see soon enough why I'm actually doing it. So checkbox date, the element, on click listen to it. I don't need any value here, but I'm going to send you to the method future date, which I'm going to create soon, and I'm going to submit as the argument a checkbox date element. Let's go down here and create a new function. It's called, what I just call it, future date, and checkbox input element, checkbox date, did I say? Okay. This variable doesn't have to be the same name, but at the same time, I just want to make it the same name so it's easier to read in the future. What do I actually have to do? So I'm going to say I'm going to need to create a new date input element to put inside of there, right? I click on this, and I'm going to create a new date input element. So I'm going to say var future date equals new date input element. Okay. Now, in whenever we create a localized function, these are not global variables. They're very local variables. Once we get out of this function, we don't use these variables anymore. So it is perfectly acceptable to use var in these areas themselves. And I think the kind of the standards recommendation is using var in stuff like this just because it makes it easier. There's no reason you have to, but there's really less benefit when you have smaller libraries, smaller functions to actually use the static typing itself. I do it for practice. You can use it or not, but we're not going to use it right here. And then we want to do the var lmp equals, and I'll show you why in just a little second here, query selector lmp, and I'm going to say future date.id equals future date. All right, so if I create a new element, it's going to have completely no information to it. So I'm going to have to give it a little bit of information right here. Actually, I should have probably put that up here, right underneath it, just to make sure it's easier to read. All right, I click on the checkbox element. It sends me here, and it creates instances of these variables. And now I'm going to say if check box date dot checked. I'm going to say LMP dot. Let me back up a little bit here. Let me explain what I'm doing. So remember we mentioned everything here is an element, here is a node. If I'm going to put something on the screen, so I'm going to add an element, how am I going to add it? I could just throw it somewhere, but if you throw it somewhere, it's probably going to be on the right, left upper hand corner, right? If you want to throw somebody, you have to say where you're actually going to throw it. And how do you do it? Remember the example of the wall. There's a picture on the wall. Put the next picture left of it, or right of it, or below it, or 6 inches above it, or something like that. You use it as a reference point. So what I'm going to do is this particular date input element, I'm going to use this as a reference point in putting the next thing, the next element itself. I could use any of these things. I could use it before here, after here, before anywhere, but I'm going to choose to put it apparently right here, LMP. Actually, I think I want to put it under, I could do either one. Should I put it? Let me just do either one. Okay, I'm going to put it under the LMP input element itself. So I'm going to say LMP dot, so with respect to here, I'm going to put it insert adjacent element where after end, and the element is named future date. All right, so let's save this and let's see what actually happens. So nothing there. I click on it and nothing actually happens. Okay, checkbox date var LMP dot insert adjacent element after end future date. If checkbox dot date checked. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, by the way, it does this twice. I think I mentioned this before. Because of this script right here, I'm going to actually comment this out for right now. Save it. So I'm going to click here. It actually appears right inside of there. So I could put it underneath the checkbox. I could put it way up inside here. If I wanted under the checkbox, I would say checkbox date insert. Right inside there, okay? I could put a break input element, but I could put elements inside of there. So that actually would work. So if I said here, last menstrual period is here, it still does work. If I don't check it, it goes back. If I check it again, oh, it goes to the first element, so you don't want to do that. Check on it. The future estimate. Uh-oh. The future gestational age is going to be 19 weeks. Again, it changes because it's the current date if you uncheck that. So that's how you can actually add elements here. So how do we actually do this? So there are several different ways of actually adding elements. Insert adjacent element simply means I have an element here, I'll add it somewhere else. The parameters, it's after end, after begin, then there's before end, and then there's before begin. All right, what do these actually mean? Remember I mentioned the difference between actually something you see, elements, an element you see, and kind of a conceptual, like an idea type of element. And I used the example of a div versus like an input element. So let's just say, for example, we have here we have like a div element right inside of here. If you have a complete, not a complete, if you have a submit element right inside of here, it's one object here. But if you have a div, you can actually have stuff in between that as well, right? That's what these options right here, before begin, remember the quotes, before begin, after begin, stuff like that. So what it's saying is that for if you have a visual element, you have to be after the end or before the beginning, right? Because that's the only thing that you can do. For a div ID, if you say before, after the end, or before the end, what it means is that you'll put an element here. So you may put an element here. Or if it's after the beginning, you may put the element here. Before the beginning, the element would be here. After the beginning, here. Before the end, here. After the end, here. Okay, so it kind of gets a little confusing, but if you think about it in the way of a div, you have content inside of there, it makes a lot of sense, right? But hang on one second. There is also one more thing you could actually do. So how else could you add this on top of here? How could you add this? We'll go over that in the future itself. How could you add another? Hang on a second, it's going to crash. How could you add another date itself? You could have put a div here. So just made a div after this text, all right? And then in the div, for the div, it would be, let's just say the div element is called div element, okay? It would be dot children dot add, and then it would be the name of the element, which would be future date. Now this is not going to work, of course, because there's no such thing as div element, because I haven't created one at this point in time. But at the same time, it's the idea that if you have a div right inside of here, you can have children inside of there, right? Again, this is a conceptual, this is an idea, this is a separating type of element as opposed to a graphical element. How do you have children inside of there, right? How do you have something children inside of this submit button? You really can't. But at least with the div element, you can have children inside of there. And that's just another way of adding things onto the screen. Now already, with this, you can kind of see what the problem is with the DOM, can't you? So we're adding just one structure here, but what if we start adding 5 or 6? That's not even a lot. That's not, as opposed to like you see some web applications have 20 lines that come, go, change, and stuff like that. It could be extraordinarily confusing, right? That's one of the issues here with the DOM itself, and that's why I was mentioning in the very beginning how people complain about the DOM, drives them crazy about it. That's one of the reasons. So now we are able to click on here, unclick, click, and it keeps adding. Whoops, wait a minute. What's going on here? Okay, well, if I unclick it, shouldn't I actually remove it again? Wouldn't that make sense? So I'm adding, but I'm not actually removing. So why don't I go back here? If it's checked, add it, right? How about if it's unchecked, because there's only two states, right? Checked and unchecked. Then I'm going to say, why don't I say future date dot remove? I can remove the element itself. So let's see if that works. Add it. It's actually not removing it. Let's look for any errors. There's really no error there also. What's going on? So you create the object right inside of here, right? The object that you're inserting here, if you think about it, the object is in Dart. This particular object you put on the screen, right? But that's not exactly the same thing as the object in Dart, okay? So if we separate, here's HTML, here is Dart. We have the object in Dart, and then we pasted it onto the screen here. But if we remove the future date, it doesn't actually remove it from here. Why? Well, because you have an object here and you could paste it on multiple times, can't you? These are all the same Dart element future date, all of them together, right? So what we're actually asking is not to just remove future date. We're asking to remove this particular instance of future date, right? So how do we do that? How do I identify this particular one? It would be query selector, right? So query selector. There might be an easier way than this, but I think this is the only way that this is the probably one of the ways that I know how. We'll go over some more in a future video. Query selector, what did I call it? Future date. So what you're saying is this particular instance of it, query selector future date, remove it if I unclick it. All right? So let's see if this works any better. Now, notice I didn't change anything else because I made it modular enough that I don't really need to, right? So I know this code's going to work because this code is adding stuff. It's not taking anything away. Adding features, not taking the features away. That's what I meant by it. You're actually taking some elements away. It's going to crash again. Okay, let's get back to here. Okay, due date here, estimated gestational age. Do you want to know the gestational age for a future date? Yes, I do. And I'm going to say it is here. Oh, and I'll change it right here. Oh, wait a minute. I changed my mind. I don't want that future date. Or maybe I do. No, I don't. No, I don't. It's 10 weeks and 4 days. So you can go back and forth. And that's the simple, relatively straightforward way of adding and removing elements on top of here. But just be careful of the trap. Make sure you know the names of your elements, where they are with respect to each other. Remember, with respect to each other, how is one related to the next? And how did you actually list it so that you can manipulate them and know how to manipulate because you know where it is in the future. Thank you.